I just left myself some voice notes concerning what I just read on old insurance policies. And I'm right now looking at a letter that was written by Nancy Pelosi to Dear Democratic Colleague, written on April 14th, 2020. This would be the day before April 15th, 2020, which would be when the first draft of the president's budget for the year was due to Congress. Obviously, the Speaker of the House would know this. So I'm just going to respond as somebody that contacted the House of Representatives, Senate in early 2016 and has repeatedly attempted to contact numerous agencies and numerous individuals because of their committee responsibilities in Congress for the last 4 years, and to this day has not had a follow up on those reports. She says, first thing she says, the truth is that Donald Trump dismantled the infrastructure handed to him, which was meant to plan for and overcome a pandemic resulting in unnecessary deaths and economic disaster. In January of 2017, before he was sworn into office, there was release of protective action guides from the Environmental Protection Agency that demonstrate that there had been an intentional effort to recalibrate and reconfigure policy in accordance for how to deal with a radiological incident within the domestic United States that presented numerous security hazards that were too glaring for anybody that had anything close to a reasonable relationship with the sectors involved could have ignored. This was done the last month of Obama's presidency and before Donald Trump was sworn in, so far as I understand. Within the end of the first month of what would have been his term, the end of February of 2017, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission posted on its website a report concerning its efforts to address what I am paraphrasing as behavioral science testing of people involved in industrial inspection. If the infrastructure that was handed to Donald Trump included intentionally engaging in psyops in order to try to undermine the confidence of people that would be involved in vital areas of different sectors connected to public health and safety, then that's not infrastructure. That is called a setup for sabotage. And if you want to attribute that to the previous 8 years of presidential administration under Obama, then I would agree with you on that. The second point, the truth is that in January, meaning January 2020, Donald Trump was warned about this pandemic, ignored those warnings, took insufficient action, and caused unnecessary death and disaster. That is, I do not believe that's true. The year before, there was a series of brinksmanship between Democrats and the president's administration concerning the crisis on the U.S. Mexico border. Specifically, of concern was an understanding that while the president was requesting money for border wall security, he was being told the money was already available to the Department of Homeland Security but hadn't been spent. And at the same time, what was needed was more investment in health and human services programs for people that were amassed at the U.S. Mexico border, as well as letting people inside the United States with an understanding that they could potentially be offered sanctuary in different cities throughout the United States. There were deaths at the U.S. Mexico border that were attributed to Donald Trump, including deaths of children that were specifically announced in time for a major bond issue in a municipality that fit into a pattern of racketeering activity connected to specific and strategic announcements of caravans of people leaving on the day of major announcements around municipal bond issues. So this was something that was going on before, right? Before January of this year. Not only that, last year during the appropriations process, the ending of the summer, there were at least two bills pending in Congress concerning patch kits. And those patch kits and other elements of those patch kits and what they entailed and what they actually spoke to, specifically in regards to a cybersecurity incident that is absolutely relevant right now if we told the truth about what's going on, as well as other sorts of materials and methods that would be necessary to respond to a domestic biological attack were already in the president's budget for the Department of Defense. However, in November of last year, there was a emergency appropriations bill specifically for Health and Human Services concerning Medicare and Social Security, as well as additional allocations for the Department of Homeland Security, dated for an expiration of March 15th. This was a temporary emergency appropriations bill that just so happened to be dated on the date of the president's Department of Defense budget. It was obvious that there was absolutely no intention of honoring what had been the Department of Defense budget as it was sent to Congress, and instead there was to be an overwrite of whatever was entailed in that emergency appropriations package, which was passed before, I believe, 2 weeks before Congress failed in being able to bring articles of impeachment against the president. The truth is that Donald Trump told his most loyal followers that the pandemic was a hoax and that it would magically disappear, thus endangering lives and paving the way for economic disaster. Now, you, I understand, have much more experience with these matters than I do, so you probably understand precedents. But, there's always this challenge in terms of responding to something as it was at the time it was first declared, and then later revisiting it and evaluating it within the context of policies or even laws that had been changed in the time between when it was first announced or first reported, and then later, sometimes years later, when it's allowed to be acknowledged. I contend that if you sit on an issue and then intentionally change policy or change the laws so that you can try to say that now you have some legal justification for doing activity that had previously been reported as criminal activity, that you've refused to respond to while you sat on it for years, laundered it into other sectors, and then tried to reapply as some sort of credit to your advantage because there's some sort of policy change that seems to be apparent in some other function or capacity, I contend that's fraud. And it might be actually evidentiary of a pattern of racketeering activity that is contributing to other factors, including factors that need to be addressed as criminal matters. But if you're not one of those people, then you go with the status quo, then my understanding is just yesterday. It's 1:15 a.m. right now. So on the 21st, you were talking about fumigation and the president leaving, whether he knew it or not. So I'm just saying, in terms of figuring out how to present the message and how to make sure to be consistent, this understanding of magical disappearance, this sort of you're going to be leaving whether you know it or not, it sounds like a veiled threat. And if you needed to impeach the president, you've had 2 chances to file formal articles of impeachment. But I believe and understand that because the issues that are actually impeachable offenses are ones that you are also a culpable person in, as well as your Democratic colleagues, that we don't ever get to that. What we get to is brinksmanship that are these veiled threats that go back and forth and engage in activities that represent that the people of the United States are willing to engage in that kind of depravity. And I think that you're mistaken in that regard. Because just as he can be voted out of office if we were allowed to engage in a legitimate election process, so could you. And so could all of your Democratic colleagues. The truth is that we did not have proper testing available in March, despite Trump repeatedly claiming that we did. And even now, we do not have adequate test, mask, PPE, and necessary equipment, which creates unnecessary death and suffering. I just want to refer you again to what were those different bills being recommended and that were being proposed in late summer and early fall of last year, specifically regarding patch kits and specifically regarding other kinds of protective equipment. And if it would, could you please distinguish what's the difference between personal protective equipment and individual protective equipment? Because there was a report and there were a series of actions taken specifically concerning individual protective equipment dated for October 29th of 2018 that you should personally be very well apprised of, and certainly many of your Democratic colleagues should be as well. The truth is, because of an incompetent reaction to this health crisis, the strong economy handed to Donald Trump is now a disaster, causing the suffering of countless Americans and endangering lives. I just want to bring attention to the fact that in the summer of 2017, there was alarm expressed over what at the time I believe was a potential allegation of some form of insider trading, because the president was giving a public announcement with about his concern or his thoughts on what was the pending jobs report. It had not been released to the public yet, but somehow he had information on the jobs report, and he had made a public announcement about that. I think it was either first via one of his Twitters. So there was alarm that he was making these announcements and discussing matters connected to the jobs report that had not been made to the public at that time. I think that if it were to be considered in a context of other things that had been reported at that time concerning manipulation of data and information, including the processes by which very important health and human services, specifically related factors, were changing concepts and characterizations of data as information, and that there were also changes to the treasury system specifically about how to report data, not information, and that those were absolutely 100% directly connected to the health and human services, which also 100% directly responds to things like billing, which have to do with economic factors, including economic factors regarding job numbers, as well as preparedness for people involved in relevant jobs, but that also have to do with an understanding of prevention and preparedness and who needs what, when, where, why, and how. And I'm not even yet talking about STD numbers, and I'm not yet even talking about income numbers from the census and how those all went. That was plenty of information and data that was available at the time that just needed to be appropriately contextualized and acknowledged, because there was plenty of forewarning about how the measures that had already been put in place had been tampered with so that they would not be effective if there were, in fact, to be a call up for an emergency of this sort. The truth is, a weak person, a poor leader, takes no responsibility. A weak person blames others. Are you talking about the President of the United States, or are you talking about the people that you're intending to use and broker as some sort of data in terms of the contracts you and your high scale, high price, high funding financiers are planning to get on this crisis? I just want to know. Because if you're making a character assessment about the president, then it would have been nice for you to be as specific about that as you were about actually nothing else that you said. Right? Because it sounds like what you're saying is that the people you represent are weak and they take no responsibility and they blame others. And if that's how you're trying to program us, then I really wish you would take responsibility for that.